I'm Colonel Pat Seaver, Chief of the Army Media Relations Division. It's my honor to introduce the Honorable Ryan D. McCarthy, Acting Secretary of the Army, and General Mark Milley, Chief of Staff of the Army. Secretary McCarthy and General Milley will begin today's press conference with a brief opening statement, and we'll open it up for questions. Please wait for me to call on you. Let's keep it to one follow-up so that we can try to get everybody in. In addition, when asking your questions, please identify yourself and your news organization. Mr. Secretary, over to you.
Thanks, Colonel Seaver. Thanks, Colonel Seaver. Good. Thank you, Colonel Seaver. I've been on the job for about 67 days. I know some of you, and look forward to meeting the rest of you over time. I've developed my relationship with the press corps and other media outlets. I'm going to make a brief set of remarks, and then ask General Milley to make some remarks as well, and then we'll take your questions. So, 6 years ago, when I left the Department of Defense, the world was a dangerous and complex place. Today, the danger and complexity in the world only increased, and the size of America's Army has decreased. The competitive advantage that the Army has long enjoyed, however, is eroded. The equipment our soldiers use, the Abrams, Bradley, Blackhawk, Apache, and Patriot, were designed in the 70s, fielded in the 80s, battle-tested in the 90s during Desert Storm, and during the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003. These systems have been continuously and incrementally upgraded since their debut, and there is a limit to the incremental improvements that can be made before they no longer offer the degree of overmatch our Army requires. Modernizing these aging platforms has yielded benefits. They're now squarely on the curve of diminishing returns. They were developed at what was arguably the pinnacle of the industrial era 40 years ago. And anything much over 40 years old probably needs to be examined regularly. Our peer competitors have continued to invest in technologies that counter what have traditionally been the strengths of the American military. And they are doing it faster than us. General Milley the other day said, if you don't adapt to the changing environment, you die. Ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. Army has to adapt. To that end, General Milley and I have already begun the process of transforming our acquisition process and implementing the Army's new modernization strategy. First, we worked with Ms. Ellen Lord, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, to rescind the investment, research, and development policy in order to incentivize industry to invest robustly in R&D, rather than them buying back billions of dollars of stock like they have over the past 5 years. Second, we have signed two directives that lessen the likelihood of catastrophic failures. These two fundamental directives address two critical aspects: the requirements process and talent management. The first directive enables rapid prototyping that will accept failure early, inserts the end user, the warfighter, into the prototyping process at the beginning, and keeps them engaged throughout the process. In order to accomplish this, we've established pilot cross-functional teams that are focusing on 6 modernization efforts. These CFTs will report regularly to the Undersecretary of the Army and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. These teams will compress the timeline by involving the end user in defining the requirements, interpreting, prototyping, and validating a concept prior to its low-rate initial production. These CFTs will be led by leaders who understand how our formations operate in combat and include elements from program management, finance, science, and technology. The second directive addresses talent management. This is the first and foremost a leadership issue, and thus begins at the top. We're focused on mission success. Again, this is a leader issue, and I'll remain personally engaged along with General Milley, General McConville, and the future Secretary to engage the success. The Army is at an inflection point. Having focused on restoring readiness to prevail in the future, we now must reform how we modernize the Army. The roles, responsibilities, structures, and organizations we have to address this challenge are disparate, and in many respects, born of a bygone era. I have therefore approved the establishment of a task force to develop a new command to consolidate the processes that inform and deliver Army capabilities. Army modernization under one roof. This is a significant change. It requires both careful and expeditious consideration, more detailed planning for how this command will exercise its responsibilities while maintaining the momentum and coherence of the rest of the Army enterprise will be required. I have tasked Lieutenant General Ed Cardone to lead this planning effort. This week, he will begin forming a 120-day task force to frame and present decisions about the ultimate form and function of the new command to the Undersecretary of the Army and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, Jim McCarthy. The process will be transparent and thorough. We do not have time to waste. While many of the details remain to be determined, some of these decisions have already been taken. The new command will be formed from within existing force structure. Faster results will be obtained through streamlining existing work processes and reinventing others. Though details are still to be decided, the scope of the new command will extend from idea to delivery and include the Army's future work, concept development, requirements determination, and prioritization, and the acquisition of the materiel that will ensure the Army remains the world's most lethal fighting force. Command's modernization will be conducted through cross-functional teams for each of the Army's 6 modernization priorities, and they are in order: long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift platforms, a mobile and expeditionary network, air and missile defense capabilities, and soldier development. We have a long way to go and many details to work out, and the Army can't do it on its own. Failure to pass the fiscal year 18 budget will most assuredly prevent us from modernizing the Army. It will force us to continue mortgaging our future readiness and lethality to profound implications. Our adversaries will be emboldened, and global stability will continue to grow, and our options to respond to an emerging threat will be reduced. Above all, the Army needs sufficient, sustained, and predictable funding to restore the balance and reduce risk. The Budget Control Act and continuing resolutions cause uncertainty. It forces us to make trade-offs that prioritize readiness over modernization. Continuing resolutions breed mediocrity. As I like to say, don't defend the country on a budget, you defend it on a strategy. Having a forward-looking acquisition and modernization strategy will reduce the time required, field items, demonstrate stewardship of taxpayer dollars, and justify the adequate level of funding. We will begin prototyping a select number of next-generation combat systems, technologies, and vehicles, moving from experimentation to prototype to production as soon as the technologies are mature enough. We will support this modernization strategy by continuing to divest less important capabilities to free up resources for higher priorities. And to that end, I have already initiated a reprioritization of funding in the POM and an S&T review that will support the development of these efforts. We will invest with ruthless prioritization against them, and allocated resources will be protected across the 5 years Futures Defense Plan. I close with what Senator McCain told me at my confirmation hearing. He said, "Mr. McCarthy, our Army is facing a crisis. With current operational demands, we can no longer accept that only 1/3 of the Army's brigade combat teams are ready for deployment. The Army is in need of serious modernization, leaving our soldiers increasingly unprepared for the jobs we ask of them. Our soldiers deserve more than aging equipment and compressed training cycles. They deserve the gold standard. I've made it my mission to get it to them." With that, I'll turn it to you, General Milley.
Thanks, Secretary. And I've known Secretary McCarthy now for going on 10 years, a little bit over 10 years. It's a guy who is completely committed to our nation. He's in this business that he's in as a secretary, all for the right reasons. He's the right man, right place, right time sort of thing. And he's got enormous experience, not only as a combat veteran in the Rangers, a graduate of VMI, he's got good experience up on the Hill, he's got good experience in industry, and he had tremendous experience at the very senior levels of the Department of Defense, working for Secretary Gates some years ago. So welcome to him. He's been here a relatively short time, but he's a man of enormous integrity and energy, and he's a good friend, and he's here to make sure that our soldiers and our formations and our leaders get the support they need from the entire community. So thanks, Secretary, for the opportunity to serve along your side yet again. I don't have an opening statement, but I did want to just make a couple of quick remarks. 2 days ago, 16 years ago, on 7 October 2001, U.S. forces entered into Afghanistan. And we, the United States, have been fighting consecutively for 16 years. And the majority of that fighting has been done by Army soldiers of one type or another. We're very proud of what they've accomplished. and we have made our nation is recommitted to that effort in order to defeat terrorism and to ensure that our very first objective in going in there is sustained, which is to prevent Afghanistan from ever kind of becoming a platform for terrorists to strike the continent of the United States. So just keep them in mind. This week, we brought home the remains of soldiers who are engaged in a global fight against terrorism. Secretary McCarthy and Vice Chief of Staff McConnell and myself attended several dignified transfer ceremonies at Dover. It's a stark reminder of the war we're in. 7 soldiers this week, 5 in combat, 2 in training from Iraq and of course the case of Nigeria, Africa. So I'd ask you all kind of remember that, and I know the American people do, and just keep them in your thoughts and prayers as we go forward. As I think you all were in the session just prior to coming here with Secretary Mattis, who gave a really excellent keynote address full of lots of very, very not so subtle guidance to us, the Army. The world, as Secretary McCarthy just said, is a dangerous, increasingly unstable place. And our task remains, number one, has been for 2 years, it really has been for a lot of years, remains readiness. There's always a tension between readiness and future readiness, otherwise known as modernization. But readiness remains, our current readiness, our current formations remains our number one task. But we have to shift gears a little bit because future readiness matters critically. Because believe it or not, the future will be here someday. So we have got to posture the institution to do that. And as we said last year and the year before, when we were going through the various studies, there are no sacred cows here, and we have to be willing and have the courage to make the changes necessary. We have to adapt, as Secretary McCarthy just said, or we die as an organization. You become irrelevant as an organization. So with his initiatives that he just rattled off about fundamentally shifting and changing some of the characteristics of the institution, restructuring the corporation, if you will, which is the largest re-engineering of the corporation, the largest re-engineering of the institutional army in 4 decades, by the way. This is going to be a banner year. All the details, as you mentioned, aren't worked out. But Ed Cardone, who happens to be sitting right back there, so afterwards you can pin him against the wall and get all your questions answered.
120 days from now.
120 days. So actually, we've been studying this for quite a bit of time. It's got 120 days left to get the ink to dry so that we can move up. Our objective is to get these organizations and this new command stood up by summer of 18. So we're going to move out smartly. This is necessary. It's important. And I absolutely believe that unless we do this, we'll be increasingly losing ground against potential adversaries. As you know, right now, we've got 180,000 troops, and more or less, in about 140 countries working for combatant commanders around the world. And one of those, and I'm sure there's probably a question or two out there, is in Asia, and specifically Korea. That question was asked of Secretary Mattis a few minutes ago. I'll just preempt the questions. I am not going to elaborate. I may make a comment or something, but I'm not going to elaborate much on Korea. That's a situation in which I and the other Joint Chiefs of Staff and Chairman Dunford are all intimately involved in, but I will not be at liberty to discuss any kind of specifics on that. So just going to preempt any questions on that. And then lastly, I just echo and associate myself with the comments Secretary McCarthy made about the budget. It's impossible to create readiness for the current set of operations the Army is doing, or to create readiness in the future, like modernization and procurement. It's impossible to do that without steady, predictable funding. And for that, we rely on the United States Congress. As Secretary Mattis just said, he had tremendous confidence in the Congress, as do I. They are the people's representatives in this representative democracy, this representative experiment called America. And I do have tremendous confidence that they will come through and ensure that the Army is properly supported with adequate funding to defend the American people. So with that, I think we're both prepared to answer whatever questions anyone may have.
All right.
Yes, ma'am. We'll start right here.
You start with
You're going to
me.
moderate.
All right, sir.
Got a shot.
Thanks, General Milley, you mentioned the deaths of the soldiers in Niger last week. I want to ask you, one of the things that AFRICOM said was that they're looking at and taking another look at their training partnerships in Africa. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the risks that the Green Berets face in Africa.
Yeah.
Did they underestimate perhaps the risk of the Islamic
Right.
State? And what kind of changes, particularly to security, do you think are needed? And Mr. Secretary, you want to take some of that too?
Well, let me, a couple of comments. First, you mentioned the Green Berets are facing. Just for clarity, we are training, advising, and assisting indigenous armies all over the world. And I anticipate and expect that will increase, not decrease, in years to come. Our fundamental strategic approach to dealing with terrorism and terrorists is to work by, with, and through host nation, partnered nation, friends and allies, and work through their indigenous security forces in order to provide for a stable environment for their own country. And by doing that, we'll be accomplishing U.S. objectives. Who does that? So you mentioned the Green Berets. It's not just the Green Berets. And those killed were not just Green Berets, by the way. So we have a mix, a task-organized mix of appropriate capabilities that include special operations forces and conventional forces from not just the Army, but all the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, around the world doing these things. So it's important. One of the initiatives that we, the Army, are doing to increase our capability to conduct, train, advise, assist, enable, and accompany missions around the world is the establishment of Security Force Assistance Brigades, which you may have heard about. I won't elaborate on that unless you have questions on them. I think we put out a variety of information papers on it, but if you do have questions, we'll be happy to answer those. Those are SFABs, as they're known. We're standing up the very first one right now at Fort Benning. Our plan is to do 6 in the next year or two, and that's 5 in the regular Army and 1 in the National Guard. But it is a dangerous mission, TAA missions around the world. It depends on where you're at. And they are reviewing, AFRICOM is reviewing very closely the security procedures that they're using for these teams that are there in Africa, and they're evaluating the mission, enemy, terrain, time, and all of that to come up with the appropriate risk mitigation factor. As far as the specifics of that case in Nigeria, that is being reviewed thoroughly, and we're not right now in a position where we can say with authority exactly what happened. Neither Secretary and I can say that because we don't have the information at our fingertips with that level of granularity, and I wouldn't want to mislead anybody and give bad information.
But do you think the ISIS threat there is underestimated?
Do I think it's underestimated? Well, first of all, let me back up from ISIS as an entity. There is a wide variety of terrorist organizations under multiple alphabet soup lettered names. ISIS is but one. You have in that particular area, you've got Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, you've got Boko Haram in the general area, and you've got dozens of others. Some are small, some are big. I think, based on what I've seen so far, I think we have a reasonably good picture, assessment of their size, composition, disposition, and their capabilities.
Ryan Brown from.
I thought the Secretary wanted to.
We're in the midst of a review for the National Defense Strategy, which will be published in January, so I'm not going to elaborate on national objectives per se in the African continent this time.
Ryan Brown.
General,
General, I know you spoke briefly on North Korea, an attempt to hedge off the question. You talked a little bit about how the modernization lags and the undersize of the current state of forces. Are you confident that the Army, at least, is currently postured to react to a situation on the Korean Peninsula? And in the past, you've described a potential conflict on the peninsula as catastrophic, a scale that we wouldn't have seen in generations. Do you still feel that way?
Of course. I mean, it depends. I mean, when you say conflict, that can have a wide range. But a full-blown war on the Korean Peninsula would be horrific by any stretch of the imagination. No one has any doubts about that. Secretary Mattis has said it publicly. The damage to the infrastructure, the economic effects, the casualties, the humanitarian impacts would be enormous. There's no question about it. In fact, Chairman Dunford said in testimony, however, when asked by one of the senators or congressmen, he said, war on the Korean Peninsula, however, is no longer unimaginable. He said, what's unimaginable is an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear weapon striking a U.S. city. So yes, it would be horrible. There's no question about it. But so would an intercontinental ballistic missile striking Los Angeles or New York City. That would be equally horrible. There are no good, easy, risk-free options here. This is extraordinarily difficult, extraordinarily dangerous. No one should underestimate it. And I certainly, and others in uniform, we're not going to make the decision. That decision will be made by the duly elected representatives of the United States of America. But the only thing I would say is that in terms of time, I would say there is a timeline on this. I'm not going to be explicit about it, based on the technological development of the North Korean missile testing and so on. It's not an indefinite amount of time, and there will be decisions made. No question about it.
Thank you. All right, Tony Capaccio, Bloomberg.
I have two quick questions. A year ago, we heard about the Rapid Capabilities Office. It seems to have dropped off the map. Can you give a sense of some of the initiatives that have been fielded in the last year? And for General Milley, what are the top concerns among the Joint Chiefs of any of the military options that have been developed? And I'm not asking.
Yeah, I'm going to flip the RCO question over to the Secretary, but let me answer your second question first.
Okay.
I am not going to share any concerns that the Joint Chiefs have, any options. I'm just not going to go there, okay? The only thing people need to know, there are military options available, and to our national decision making. And for us, the Army, our task is readiness. And we have to have an Army that is trained, manned, equipped, and skilled to engage in a wide variety of operations, to include operations on the Korean Peninsula. We've had that capability since 1950, and we've been steadily training at it for 7 decades now. We are capable, we the United States Army, are capable of doing our part in anything that the President so requires.
How about the casualties of the South Korean citizens? Is that the biggest concern?
I'm not going to answer any questions on any concerns of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Those concerns will be presented to the Secretary Mattis and the President in conversations that you will not participate in.
Fair enough.
Tony, with respect,
I may hear about it.
Tony, with respect to the Rapid Capabilities Office, they have a couple of wins over the last year. In particular, prototyping the EW capability, putting in the 2nd Cavalry Regiment into Europe, and it'll be in FY18. But from the broader perspective, the RCO will be a foundational element where we want to go. We want to scale that type of behavior and that type of capability to the larger enterprise.
Can I ask you one follow-up? You were with Secretary Gates when he canceled the Future Combat System. What
Yes.
lessons from that fiasco have you taken that's helped shape the way you're moving forward with Army modernization?
So I was in the room when the decision was made.
That's all I had.
So Future Combat Systems changed its identity. It's, the foundational element of what we're trying to do is requirements, definition, and interpretation. Having warfighters in the process all the way. So when they're doing experimentation and prototyping, you actually have a leader that has led a combat formation recently. How all the pieces come together. Whether it's my time in OSD or in the defense industry, it's when they're involved sooner, and you fuse the technical community with the warfighters, you can make the trade-offs faster. We lose so much time because we just pass paper around the system. So Future Combat Systems changed its identity. Requirements kept changing, and confusion was to be set on the entire enterprise and the defense industry partners that we work with on the outside. And it just ultimately, you didn't understand the identity of the program. So, those were tough times. It was 2009, right after the fiscal crisis ensued. We had to make a lot of hard choices to protect the balance sheet of the department. And it was like 34 different programmatic terminations that happened. And, it's that discipline and consistent leadership in the process to make the trade-offs and carry it through to, through the milestone C before rate production.
Captain Barrett, that's
Just to go back to Africa, is there any clarity on who killed the Americans? That hasn't been officially released yet. And secondly, how does this play into your plans to grow the Army? You're saying you expect more training by assist, which are mostly special operations. You mentioned these other more conventional ideas, but we heard from some special operations leaders that they don't want to be larger or great
So
size.
we're mixing apples and oranges there a little bit.
Sure.
And the train, advise, assist, accompany, enable, it's all one kind of phrase, because you have to do all those tasks. That mission, frankly, is bigger than special forces has ever been designed or capable to handle. So what's happened over the last 16 years is special forces does a whole set of mission profiles, things like direct action and so on. But in the training world, what they primarily do, almost exclusively do, is the training of host nations special forces, the commandos and others in these host nations. The conventional armies of these countries, the larger part of their security force is trained, advised, assisted through conventional forces in the U.S. Army and Marines. So what we've done for 16 consecutive years is done that function on essentially an ad hoc basis, where we've ripped chains of command out of conventional brigades and on short term assign them over as chains of command into theater to advise host nation forces. And then the bulk of the troops of that particular brigade or battalion were left at home, and they were losing readiness by doing so. And we've tried a variety of things in the past, mid-teams and all kinds of things. We tried a few years back to set something up at Fort Riley. But all of it, in every case, was fundamentally ad hoc. It is my assessment, and it's assessment of the Secretary and assessment of the Army staff, that we are likely to be involved in train, advise, assist operations around the world for many years to come, as we have for many years in the past. So we think it's about time that we recognize that fact with force structure specifically designed to train, man, and equip organizations that can go forward and professionally train, advise, and assist conventional indigenous forces. Special forces will continue to train the commandos and so on, but what is needed are forces that can train conventional forces in counterinsurgency and light infantry type tactics around the world. And that's what these SFAT are. They will be chains of command of an infantry brigade, commanders on their second command, all of the soldiers are volunteers. They're going to be highly vetted. They'll approach standards that will be similar to the Ranger Regiment. They will look and act in many ways and be trained similar to special forces, but they are not special forces. They are conventional forces, chains of command that will have some added skill training over the extended period of time, and they will be assigned to these units for 3 years, and they will deploy overseas to train, advise, and assist. So the brigade commander, the battalion commander, the company commander, those guys will be on their second command, just like when you go to the Ranger Regiment. The APFT, the physical standards are higher than the average Army. These guys will have to score 70% on all their tests. They have to get a secret clearance. They have to do a commander's interview. There's a whole selection process to becoming part of an SFAT. And then we're going to take care of them on the backside. So they will do very well in promotion boards, and they will do very well in a wide variety of other areas throughout the Army. One of the reasons the past efforts have failed is they were temporary in nature. They weren't built into the force structure. They weren't built into promotion boards and so on. So we are institutionalizing the effort to advise and assist foreign countries. And we're doing it without increasing the baseline force structure of the numbers of brigades. So we're creating 6, but they are chains of commands of brigades. They are not full-up brigades of 5,000. They're relatively small, nimble, highly trained, very, very light, limited amounts of equipment, and they'll be value added, I think, in the requirements of the future. Does that answer your question?
Very well.
Thank you, Myers.
Who's behind the?
Well, we do, Secretary and I and others do have information, but I prefer this juncture in public media not to address that because I'm not 100% sure that the information is 100% accurate. So we do have information on the group that did it, their nature, their disposition, and so on and so forth. And appropriate organizations within the United States military are digging deeper into that and take appropriate action if required.
Thank you, Myers.
Will the SFABs poach from existing force structure, and on the same token, you're asking to grow the Army again this year, will that extra boost of soldiers be able to fill in some of those holes?
It won't poach on existing force structure. This is added force structure. But again, these numbers are relatively small. An SFAB, the chain of command of an infantry brigade, you're looking at 500, 600 people, 700 people. It's in that range, you know, from E5, Sergeant E5, E6, Staff Sergeant, up through the brigade command. So you're not looking at huge organizations. So no, it's not going to poach from existing force structure. The people, we think we have room and the capability to sustain these organizations. Although we're doing the micro now, we definitely have the capability to do the first one. But we're looking at the micro level analysis to sustain 5 of these things in the regular Army and 1 in the Guard over time. And they'll be built over time. These aren't all going to be built in one day. Now this year we met our personnel goals as of 1 October, so we took in 28,000 additional soldiers. So we grew. So we stopped the bleeding this past year, last 18 months with the current defense budget, and that turned around. So we were heading down in terms of size. That was stopped, halted by Congress, and turned around. So we are 476 when we were headed to 460. So the regular Army was 16,000 more than what we would have been at this time had previous budgets been enacted. So that increase in troop strength has in fact alleviated some of the stress in order to man some of these SFABs. And there's a couple other piece parts that we're putting out there as well. But we think, at this point anyway, we think we should be able to man the SFAB structures that we're creating without any detriment to the other parts of the force. And that's their whole intent, is not to, their whole intent is to increase, have a professional capability, to increase the readiness of the rest of the conventional Army by relieving the rest of the conventional Army of the advisory mission. And we can rapidly expand the Army on short notice in a national emergency if required, because we'll have chains of command that are already made. Then you take the soldiers through basic training and AIT, put them into that chain of command, and you'll have brigades at a much faster pace than if you had to create them from whole cloth. So they're fulfilling really 3 functions, but their primary function is advising the system. We think we can do that without increased stress on the rest of the force.
I also have a question for Secretary McCarthy. What does talent management look like in this new modernization command that you guys are standing up?
The appropriate set of experiences that we want to look at to get our program managers and officers, fellowships with industry, master's degrees with certain disciplines, technical disciplines, and also the tenures within program management, looking at 3 to 4 year tenures. So more continuity and the right set of experiences, opportunities, so that they have a broader perspective than we've had previously.
Is that something the Army needs, more uniformed acquisition professionals?
I think it's a combination of the two. I mean, clearly the civilian workforce, the advantage of the continuity of the two. But over large measures is the time and space that they have in those positions and the experiences.
City Freeman.
Hi, Sidney Friedberg, Green.
I don't want to preempt General Cardone's recommendations, but this would be a restructuring for the appropriate roles and responsibilities in order to try to fuse the technical and warfighter communities. But I don't want to preempt his set of recommendations at this time.
One more question. Yes, sir.
And just for the record, Cindy, it's not the last century. No, and I'm not trying to be flippant here. It's a significant restructuring, probably one of the biggest in the last 40 years or so. Remember, Army Materiel Command, Forces Command, and Trade-Off, they were all formed in the 70s in the wake of Vietnam. Creighton Abrams was the Chief of Staff of the Army. He eliminated 7 major commands around the Army, restructured the Army, the institutional Army, into those 3 major subordinate commands. And that's been the fundamental structure of the Army now for 4+ decades, right, since the early 70s. And as Secretary McCarthy mentioned in his opening statement, it's time now to take a look at anything that's been around for 4 decades and restructure. And he's exactly right. And you got to give some space here, and I've asked that we all do that. Ed Cardone's got some homework to do, and he's got to come back to the Secretary with some firm recommendations for the Secretary's decision. And that may require, money moving from point A to point B. It may require people being shifted from one organization to the other. there's no intent or desire to create new organizations or to cause people to relocate from one place to another. This has more to do with streamlining of tasks and purposes and processes and getting those aligned right within the organization, which we don't think they are right now.
But the division between requirements guys and acquisition guys is very, that's very.
Yeah, that goes back at least 40 years. Stick with me, Sue. I'm talking for 40 years. Come on.
Hi, James Drew from Aviation Week. Can I ask, with this shake-up of the acquisition structure and your priorities that you listed there, one of them was future vertical lift. Could you explain what the Army's current thinking is regarding future vertical lift and, the talk about replacing four-decade-old platforms, like perhaps the Black Hawk and different aircraft in the future? Is the Army really wanting to push to a next generation system, or is ITEP and the Black Hawk and Apache re-engineering still the number one priority for the aviation side?
Of the 6 priorities that we have, 4 of them are capacity, near-term incremental upgrades, but we are looking for next-gen capability in the next-generation combat vehicle and future vertical lift. So yes, that would be more of a massive moonshot variety looking for 10x capability. So our strategy is more capacity and capability. So within the 6, we'll break that down accordingly. But the funding stream, why I put them in the order 1 through 6, is how we will fund them.
Will that include a relook at the ITEP engine acquisition and whether that's the right strategy to go forward?
I'll take that recommendation from the CFTV. I would put anything on the table.
Okay, but there is a general desire for a next generation rotorcraft of some description.
Yes.
Can I follow on here for a second, just kind of back out of the micro, the ITEP and all that, and try to explain as best I can some of the logic. Why those 6 priorities? Why are they listed like that? There's some thought behind that. So, you ask yourself, what do you want an Army to do? Well, you want an Army to win, right? You want them to conduct ground campaigns, and you want them to win. So, in combat operations, how do you win? You win on the offense. You don't win on the defense. The defense is a operation or a tactic used to enable you to continue to offensive operation. So you win on the offense. And if you just heard Secretary Mattis in his speech at the tail end, in one of the Q&As, he said the fundamentals, and he was spot on, exactly right when he emphasized the fundamentals. So you win on the offense, and you win by being masters of the fundamentals. So what are those fundamentals? It is shoot, move, communicate, protect, and sustain. There's nothing fancy about it. So that's why you saw, when Secretary McCarthy listed those off, long-range fires. That's the shoot. We think, we assess that there's a gap, or at least a closing of the capability overmatch we've had in long-range fires, read artillery, and different types of artillery, rock artillery, tube artillery. So long-range fires, priority 1. Shoot. Second, what does that do? That enables you to move, so mobility. So you see the next 2 things as the next generation combat vehicle and future vertical lift, because both of those systems, our rotary wing and our wheeled and tracked vehicle fleets, are essentially at the end of any kind of product improvements we can do on these things. And with those both air and ground vehicles, we are going to leverage new technologies, emerging technologies, things like robotics and active protective systems and all this other kind of stuff. So that's why you see those top 3, shoot and move. And then what's the next thing? Is the network. Because you got to be able to command, control, you got to be able to see the enemy, see yourself, you got to be able to protect your network, you got to be able to do cyber defense and offense if necessary. So all things about the network, command, control, communications, electronics, all of that, electronic warfare, etc., is wrapped up into that 4th priority of the network. And as you know, and you've been covering it, we've been drilling down hard on that. And then once you do that, we've got to protect the force and sustain the force. That's why you see ballistic missile defense, for example. We have ripped out our air defense systems over the last 16 years. That's no secret to anybody. And we have got to create a layered defense around our combat formations if we are expected to fight combined arms maneuver against a near-peer competitor in a dynamic environment against someone who has significant threat. So that's why you have that in order of priority. And then lastly, we've got to, the whole system, everything is built upon the soldier. So we want to go to great lengths to increase the lethality of our soldier and their system. Everything from small arms to body armor, you name it. Everything about the soldier, we want to increase the lethality to include their training with things like synthetic training environments so they can get multiple repetitions and they can become much better at their skills. So those priorities aren't randomly put out there. They're put out there because we want to win. You win in the offense. You win by being mastery of the fundamentals. And those priorities for modernization in the Army are going to be firm. And that's the guidance that Cardell's running with in order to create an organization to deliver those priorities. And those CFT leaders are all part of that. Okay?
Mr. Secretary-in-Chief, I'll turn it back over to you for final comments.
I think we'll have a roundtable later today. Over time, I want to be able to spend as much time with you as I can. 67 days on the job, and a lot of work left to do, so thank you for your time.
I don't have any additional comments, but thank you very much. Appreciate your continued support of the Army. I hope you enjoy the AUSA conference here. I think there's a lot of good things to learn. And I apologize for being short on the Korea thing, but I know you all understand. Okay, thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming.